Pick a memory, any memory, something specific, a childhood birthday, the first time you drove a car, the moment you heard some piece of news that changed things. Hold it in your mind. Feel how vivid it is. Feel how certain you are that this is what happened, that these are the details, that this is how it felt. Now, here is what neuroscience has established, beyond serious dispute in the last 30 years, that memory is not a recording. It was never a recording. Your brain does not store experiences the way a camera stores footage, a fixed file, unchanged, retrieved intact. Every time you remember something, your brain reconstructs that memory from fragments. And every time it reconstructs it, the reconstruction is slightly different from the last one. And every time the reconstruction is slightly different, that slightly different version is what gets stored back. The memory you have right now of that childhood birthday is not the memory of the event. It is the memory of the last time you remembered it, edited by everything you have experienced, believed, and felt since. You have never once retrieved a memory unchanged. Every act of remembering is an act of rewriting. Your past is not fixed. It is a living document that your brain is continuously editing without telling you. This is molecular neuroscience. This is what happens to the proteins in your synapses when you recall something. And it has consequences for who you think you are, what you think happened to you, and whether the story you tell about your own life bears any reliable relationship to the events that actually occurred. Pull this thread and the self you think you know becomes considerably stranger. The standard picture of memory is the filing cabinet. You experience something. The brain encodes it. The encoding is stored. Later, you open the drawer, retrieve the file, read it, and put it back. The file is the same every time you open it. This is the intuitive model. It is how memory feels from the inside, and it is wrong in almost every particular. The crack appeared definitively in a series of experiments in the early 2000s by neuroscientist Karim Nader, working in Joseph Ledoux's lab at NYU. Nader trained rats to fear a specific tone by pairing it with a mild electric shock. The rats learned the association. When they heard the tone, they froze in fear. The memory was consolidated, stored in a stable form in the amygdala, the brain's fear processing center. Then Nader did something that the prevailing theory said should have no effect. He reactivated the memory, played the tone again, causing the rats to retrieve the fear association, and immediately injected a drug that blocks protein synthesis in the brain. Protein synthesis is required to form new long-term memories. Blocking it should prevent new memories from forming, but it should not touch memories that were already consolidated. The fear memory was erased, not weakened, not disrupted, erased. Rats that had previously shown strong fear responses to the tone showed almost none. The consolidated memory, retrieved and then exposed to a protein synthesis blocker, was gone as though it had never been formed. The implication was radical. Retrieving a memory does not simply access it. Retrieving a memory destabilizes. The act of remembering takes a previously stable memory and makes it temporarily fragile, labile in the technical language. In that labile state, the memory must be restabilized through protein synthesis. Reconsolidated. If you block reconsolidation, the memory does not return to its previous stable state. It is erased. This is reconsolidation, and it means that memory is not a filing cabinet. It is a manuscript that is rewritten every time it is read. The act of reading changes the text. The act of remembering changes the memory. Your past is not an archive. It is a draft. To understand reconsolidation, you need to understand what a memory is at the molecular level, because the filing cabinet metaphor fails not just conceptually but physically. It describes a type of storage that the brain does not use and cannot use. A memory is not stored in a single location. It is not a discrete file. It is a pattern of connections between neurons, a specific configuration of synaptic strengths across a distributed network. When you learn something, the synapses between certain neurons are strengthened. The neurons that fire together during the experience become more likely to fire together in the future. This is Hebb's rule, summarized as neurons that fire together wire together. The strengthening of a synapse is a physical molecular process. It requires the insertion of additional receptor proteins into the synapse, specifically AMPA receptors, which are the primary receptors for the neurotransmitter glutamate. More AMPA receptors at a synapse means a stronger connection between the neurons on either side. The synapse becomes more responsive. The memory is literally inscribed in the molecular architecture of the synaptic junction. Here is the critical part. Those receptor proteins are not permanent. They are in continuous turnover. The proteins currently in your synapses are not the proteins that were there a week ago. They have been degraded and replaced continuously by new proteins synthesized from the same genetic instructions. The memory persists not because the original proteins persist, but because the instructions for maintaining the pattern of synaptic strengths are continuously re-executed. This is the biological equivalent of the ship of Theseus. Every plank replaced, the ship remaining the same ship. Your memories persist through continuous molecular maintenance, not through the preservation of the original encoding. They are processes, not objects. Dynamic patterns, not fixed files. And this is why reconsolidation is possible. When you retrieve a memory, you reactivate the neural pattern. Reactivation triggers a cascade of molecular events at the relevant synapses. Some of the receptor proteins are temporarily removed. The synaptic connections are briefly weakened. The memory is labelized. For a window of several hours after reactivation, the memory is in an unstable state. To return to its previous strength, new proteins must be synthesized and inserted. If that synthesis is blocked, the memory is not restored. It is lost. The molecular machinery of reconsolidation would be interesting on its own as neuroscience. What makes it genuinely disturbing is what it means for the reliability of human memory. And that question was answered with uncomfortable precision by the psychologist Elizabeth Loftus decades before the molecular mechanism was understood. Loftus spent her career doing something simple and devastating. She showed people a video of a car accident and then asked them questions about it. The questions were carefully constructed to introduce details that had not appeared in the video. A stop sign that was not there, a barn in the background, a blue car instead of a green one. She asked about these details as though they were real. Not did you see a stop sign, but did the car stop at the stop sign? The subjects remembered the stop sign. They remembered the barn. They described the blue car with confidence. When their memories were tested against the actual video, the introduced details were present in their recollections as though they had been there from the beginning. The misinformation had been incorporated into the memory. The memory had been rewritten by the act of being asked about it. Loftus went further. In a series of experiments beginning in the 19s, she implanted entirely false memories, memories of events that had never occurred. Subjects were told by a trusted family member that they had been lost in a shopping mall as a child and found by a stranger. The event had never happened. Within a few sessions of being asked to remember and elaborate on it, roughly a quarter of subjects had developed detailed, confident, emotionally vivid memories of the event. They described the stranger's clothing. They described being reunited with their family. None of it had occurred. Loftus called these phantom memories. They are indistinguishable from real ones, not just to outside observers, but to the person who holds them. There is no internal signal that tells you a memory is false. There is no felt difference between remembering something that happened and confidently misremembering something that did not. The memory feels real because the neural pattern that constitutes it is real. The synaptic configuration is genuine. What it encodes is not. The most direct and most costly application of this science is in the criminal justice system. Eyewitness testimony is the single most persuasive form of evidence in a courtroom. A witness who says with conviction, "I saw him, he was there, I am certain," is more compelling to a jury than almost any other form of evidence. And it is also among the least reliable. The Innocence Project, founded in 1992 to use DNA evidence to exonerate wrongly convicted individuals, has documented hundreds of wrongful convictions in the United States. In roughly 70% of those cases, eyewitness misidentification was a contributing factor. Not cases where witnesses lied, cases where witnesses were genuinely, completely, subjectively certain that they had correctly identified the person they saw, and were wrong. The mechanism is reconsolidation. A witness sees a crime. The memory is encoded under conditions of extreme stress, which itself distorts encoding, prioritizing central details and degrading peripheral ones. The witness is then interviewed, the questions asked, the photographs shown, the lineup conducted. All of these are retrieval events. Each retrieval labelizes the memory. Each labelization creates an opportunity for new information to be incorporated. The detective's tone when a particular photograph is examined. The confirmation when an identification is made. The repeated retellings in the weeks before trial. By the time a witness testifies in court, the memory they are describing has been through dozens of reconsolidation cycles, each one potentially incorporating new information, each one feeling like faithful retrieval. The witness is not lying. The witness is telling the truth as they know it, and what they know is a memory that has been edited silently at the molecular level by every act of remembering between the original event and the moment of testimony. The certainty is real. The memory is not. The personal stakes of reconsolidation are not confined to criminal justice. They reach into the most intimate structure of identity, the story you tell about who you are and how you came to be that way. Your sense of self is largely a narrative, a story built from memories of past experiences, choices, relationships, failures, and successes. The version of you that you are today is understood in terms of the experiences that shaped it. The childhood that made you cautious, the relationship that taught you something about trust, the failure that redirected your ambitions. These memories are not just records. They are the building blocks of identity, and they are continuously being rewritten. Research on what is called the fading affect bias shows that negative emotions associated with memories fade faster than positive ones. You remember the events of your past with increasing positive coloration over time, not because good things happen more often, but because the emotional content of memory shifts during reconsolidation. The argument that seemed catastrophic at the time becomes in memory merely significant. The embarrassment becomes, in retrospect, almost funny. The grief softens. But the rewriting is not always in the direction of comfort. Trauma can work in the opposite direction. Post-traumatic stress involves, in part, memories that are reconsolidated with heightened emotional content each time they are retrieved, the opposite of normal fading. Each retrieval intensifies rather than softens. The memory grows more vivid, more distressing, more central to the person's experience of the present with each reconsolidation cycle. The past does not fade. It amplifies. This is one reason why simply talking about traumatic memories in an uncontrolled way can sometimes make things worse rather than better. Each retrieval is a reconsolidation event. If the context of retrieval is itself distressing, if the person is flooded with the emotional content of the memory while recalling it, the reconsolidation may preserve or intensify the distress rather than reducing it. Memory is not neutral storage. Retrieving it is an active process with an outcome that depends on the conditions under which retrieval occurs. Conversely, this is why some of the most promising new approaches to trauma treatment deliberately exploit reconsolidation, techniques that activate a traumatic memory and then introduce new emotional information during the labile window, so that when the memory reconsolidates, it does so with the new information incorporated, are showing considerable clinical promise. You are not trying to erase the memory. You are trying to update what it means, and the molecular window opened by retrieval is the mechanism by which updating is possible. Memory is not a record of the past. It is the brain's current best model of the past, updated every time it is retrieved. The model is built from fragments, sensory traces, emotional tags, contextual cues, reassembled at the moment of recall according to what the brain currently knows, currently believes, currently needs the past to mean the reassembly is not conscious. It does not feel like construction. It feels like retrieval, but it is construction, constrained by traces, shaped by the present, and written back over the previous version every time it runs. You have never once remembered the past. You have only ever remembered the last time you remembered it. The original experience is gone. What you carry is a copy of a copy of a copy, each generation slightly different from the last, shaped by everything that happened between then and now. Your past is not a place you can return to. It is a story your brain tells, revised with every telling. In the light of whoever you currently are, this has a specific implication for identity. The self you think you are is partly constituted by a narrative of the past that your brain has been continuously editing. The experiences that you believe shaped you are remembered through the lens of who you have already become. The memory of the failure that made you resilient was reconsolidated after you had already become resilient, and the reconsolidation incorporated that framing. The memory of the relationship that taught you about trust was reconsolidated through every subsequent relationship. The past that made you is not fixed. It is being made and remade by the present you continuously. This is not a reason to distrust everything you remember. Most memories are accurate enough for practical purposes. The gist is usually right even when the details are wrong. But it is a reason to hold your autobiography with somewhat more humility than it usually receives. The story of your life, as you currently tell it, is not a transcript. It is the current draft of an ongoing revision. The events happened. What they meant, what they felt like, what caused what, all of that is interpretation, updated at the molecular level every time you bring it to mind. There is a specific category of memory that feels immune to this argument: the flashbulb memory. The memory of exactly where you were and what you were doing when you heard some world changing news. The particular vividness, the specific sensory detail, the absolute certainty. These feel like evidence of a special recording mechanism that preserves the most significant experiences with photographic accuracy. The research says otherwise. Ulrich Neisser and Nicole Harsh studied memories of the 1986 Challenger space shuttle disaster. They asked subjects to describe exactly where they were and what they were doing when they heard the news, first the morning after, and then again 2.5 years later. The results were striking. Many subjects showed large discrepancies between their immediate and later accounts. But more striking still, the subjects were highly confident in their later, inaccurate accounts. The vividness of the memory did not correlate with its accuracy. In some cases, subjects who showed the greatest confidence in their later account had changed the most details since the original recording. Flashbulb memories feel accurate because they are emotionally intense. The emotional intensity at the moment of encoding leads to a sense of vividness and certainty that persists even as the specific details are altered through reconsolidation. The confidence is a product of the emotion, not a product of the accuracy. Feynman's most famous statement about scientific integrity was this. He said that the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. He was talking about experimental physics. He meant that the greatest danger in science is not fraud or incompetence, but motivated self-deception, the tendency to see what you expect to see, to remember the results that support your hypothesis, and forget the ones that do not, to construct a narrative of your experimental history that is more coherent and more favorable than the actual sequence of events. Reconsolidation is the neural mechanism of exactly this. Every time you retrieve a memory, you have the opportunity, not consciously, not deliberately, not maliciously, to edit it in the direction of what you currently believe, what you currently need, what is currently consistent with your self-image. The scientist who remembers being more skeptical of a hypothesis than they were, the person who remembers being kinder in an argument than they were, the parent who remembers their child's childhood in the light of the adult that child became. The editing is not lying. It is the brain doing what it does, constructing a coherent model and updating it continuously. Feynman's instruction, do not fool yourself, is harder than it sounds precisely because the mechanism of self-deception operates below the level of intention. You cannot simply decide not to reconsolidate your memories inaccurately. The reconsolidation happens regardless. What you can do, what Feynman spent his career modeling, is build external checks that do not rely on memory. Write it down when it happens. Keep records. Submit to experimental protocols that prevent you from seeing what you expect. Design the investigation so that self-deception has nowhere to hide. A lesson of reconsolidation is not that you cannot trust your memory. It is that your memory is not the right tool for establishing what actually happened. For that, you need something outside your head. Physics knew this before neuroscience confirmed it. Here is what I find most worth sitting with: the memory that is most central to your sense of who you are, the one that explains the most about you, the one you return to most often, the one that feels most definitively like the origin of something important, is almost certainly the most heavily reconsolidated memory you have. The very act of returning to it, of using it as an anchor for your identity, of telling it to other people and to yourself, is the act that has most thoroughly revised it. The memories you visit most are the memories you have rewritten most. The past you rely on most is the past you can rely on least. This is genuinely uncomfortable, not as an abstract proposition, but as a personal one. Think about the story you tell about your childhood, about a significant relationship, about a decision that changed your life. That story has been through dozens or hundreds of reconsolidation cycles. Each cycle incorporated the perspective you had at the time of retrieval. The story you tell now is the current draft, shaped by the person you currently are, read backward onto events that happened when you were someone else. There is a particular kind of argument in relationships, in families, in any long-term human entanglement that consists of two people confidently remembering the same event differently. Not one person lying and one telling the truth. Two people with genuinely different memories of what happened. Reconsolidation explains this completely. Both people have retrieved the memory many times, Both people have incorporated their subsequent experiences, feelings, and interpretations into the reconsolidated versions. The memories have diverged silently at the molecular level over years of independent revision. Both versions feel completely real. Both versions are sincerely held. Neither is the original. What the neuroscience does not do is tell you which version is closer to what actually happened. It cannot. The original encoding is gone. What remains are two current drafts, each authentic to the person who holds it, neither recoverable to its source. Feynman thought that intellectual honesty required accepting uncomfortable facts without flinching. The most uncomfortable fact about memory is that the self built from it is built on shifting ground, not on lies, not on fraud, on a biological process that is doing exactly what it evolved to do, maintaining a useful, current, adaptive model of the past rather than a faithful archive of it. The brain is not a historian, it is a storyteller, and like all good storytellers, it serves the present rather than the past. The past you remember is real. The person you were when those things happened was real. The events occurred. But the version you carry now, the meaning you have assigned, the sequence you have constructed, the emotional color that has settled over it, that is the product of everything that has happened since. It is the current draft. It has always only ever been the current draft. Here is the question that neuroscience opens and does not close. If the self is partly constituted by a narrative of the past, and that narrative is continuously being revised by the present self, then the question of who you actually are becomes genuinely difficult. The present self shapes the remembered past. The remembered past shapes the present self. The revision is circular. There is no fixed point outside the loop from which to assess either the past or the present accurately. Philosophers call this the problem of personal identity. Neuroscience has not solved it. What neuroscience has done is make it concrete. The problem is not just philosophical, it is physical. It is happening in your synapses continuously as long as you are alive and remembering. Karim Nada's original finding that a consolidated memory once retrieved becomes vulnerable was resisted fiercely when it was published. Memory researchers had spent decades building on the assumption that consolidated memories were stable. Nader's result threatened not just a theory, but an entire framework. He was told by senior colleagues that the result must be wrong. He repeated it. Others repeated it. The result held. The framework was revised. This is how science works at its best. A result that is uncomfortable, that contradicts established understanding, that has obvious implications nobody wants to follow. Confronted, replicated, and accepted, because the alternative is to prioritize the comfort of existing theory over the evidence of the world. The question I want to leave you with is this. If your memories are continuously revised in the light of who you currently are, and who you currently are is partly constituted by those memories, then what exactly is the thing that persists through time and calls itself you? Not the atoms, those are replaced. Not the memories, those are rewritten. Not the self-concept, that updates continuously. Feynman would have said, look at the question carefully. Make sure you are asking what you think you are asking. The word you is doing a lot of work in that sentence. More work perhaps than it can bear. Your brain is rewriting your past right now. It will do it again every time you remember this. The question of what that means for who you are is one the neuroscience raises and leaves, with unusual honesty, open. Where do you think the answer is?